not to reduce the concerns that you're bringing up to an aphorism, but there's something in every writer's writing class. There's the phrase "show, don't tell," which is actually, at first, it's just like a simple rule that writers learn not to have paragraphs of abstract exposition and instead just prove characters through their actions. But it takes on all sorts of bigger levels, I think, or at least it has for me as I've been writing, that like I feel like we judge ourselves by our ideals and our thoughts and the most intimate workings of our mind, but on the most basic level, I think we judge others on their actions because we don't have access to those thoughts, and what someone does is so important. So I think as a fiction writer, the way to resolve sort of the philosophy and then the nuts and bolts or the artistry of creating a narrative is to have it all revealed as in proof, like through the actions of characters and through a narrative, instead of trying in prose to express what's going on in their minds, which is a great joy for the writer, and then for a reader, if they're expecting story, can be frustrating. So one way to resolve that is just to put it into events instead of ideas.
I'd just also add that I think when I'm writing, I'm usually just trying to think more on the poetry side or about the story, and hoping that the philosophical things that I think in philosophical moments will somehow seep in by osmosis or magic. I don't know if it works, but that's what I hope will happen. Does that work? Do you work that way?
Sometimes yes. Sometimes still the problem is there, and I feel that sometimes one perspective of writing, say poetry, does have the upper hand on philosophy, and some other times the philosophy does have the upper. Depends also on the mood. Yeah, and how late you are staying in the night. This kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, okay. Yes.
I just had a question about whether poetry ever was something that occurred to you as another option, or if any of you do any.
I wrote poetry as a teenager, the way lots of teenagers do, in my diary, but I've written picture book texts, which are sort of like poetry because they have to be so concise. But I think I don't really have the talent to be a true poet in poetry. Somehow I need the space of a novel to work through my ideas. So I don't usually think of it as an option for me.
I too wrote a fair amount of poetry when I was a teen, and I found it to be a really powerful way to express things that I was feeling. But now it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, like I just think so much in narrative and I think so much in story, like I kind of need the extra words around the feeling. It's just, I guess, how I think, like it best expresses how I think about things. But, you know, never say never. Maybe in 10 years I become a poet and really love it.
I never really was drawn to poetry, mainly out of a practical concern, which was I didn't know where you put it. Like I read poems in anthologies in English class, and I didn't know where the new poems were, or how they came out, or where you found them. So it didn't seem, on a very practical level, it just seemed like, oh, that's, you know, I'd have to put that away. But then in college, I listened to Ani DeFranco. She was very popular in those years, and just. I wished like I could elect her poet laureate, that I had that power, because I just heard the words were so amazing, and they were, especially when you looked at them as lyrics and not just listened to the song, they were absolutely met all the requirements of poetry. And that broadened how I saw it, that I think often poems set to music stop being called poems, and they have a lot of that. So I really admire it, but I've never been drawn to writing them.
All right, so I want to present one question to you all. What advice can you give to our youth as future writers?
I think the number one piece of advice I would have to future writers is to allow yourself to write dreadfully, to create something on the page that is bad for a while. That like you write 20 pages and you don't want to look back because you remember those awful cliches that you put out there. And just to keep moving forward, and then allow yourself, take a few days off, go to the beach, then go back to that piece of writing, and you can edit it. Once you have something down there, you can edit it and make it good. And you have all the time in the world, as much as you want, to spend with that piece of writing to get it better and better. Cut off words here and there, figure out ways to trim it, make it concise, make it into something that you would be proud of, and then show it to people. But if you're while you're writing, you expect this has to be good as I'm writing it. Like I'm evaluating myself, and I want it to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, you're going to feel really bad, and you're not going to want to continue writing. And I think it's a lesson that anyone who's written enough pages to finally be writing well enough to get published and find a forum for it learns that lesson at some point or other, is to allow themselves to be bad at first. Because it's really cruel to yourself if you don't permit yourself that.
I definitely agree with that. And another thing that I would add to it is write the story that you want to write. It's so hard not to be influenced by external things, like thinking what you should write about or what other people might want to read. But I think the most important thing is to write the story that is in your heart.
I agree with both of them, and I would add to Eliot's, even now I still have to do that, let myself write badly when I'm doing the first draft of a book. I try not to put any pressure on myself to make it good. I just try to get it down on paper, because the other thing that you need to do is finish something. Like if you start a project, you have to write it all the way to the end, unless it's hopeless, but you have to finish something, because you can't do anything with an unfinished novel or an unfinished story. So if you finish it, even if it's terrible, then go back and make it better. You're much more likely to actually accomplish something.